This is the History of Portugal podcast, an Eat to My Own Beat podcast. New episodes every Friday. Check us out on our Facebook page, the History of Portugal podcast, on YouTube, as well as my website, www.eattomyownbeat.com. Welcome back to the History of Portugal podcast, episode 130, The Meridian Revolt from 1144 to 1145. The Almoravid power in Iberia began to crumble in 1144 when the Meridians staged a major revolt in Garb, led by the Sufi mystic Ibn Qazi. Ibn Qazi was a radical anti-Almoravid millenarian whose writings displayed strong Islami-orientalist tendencies, had given up leisurely life. A complex combination of Almohad ideology, claims to messianism, a spiritualist idea of Islam, the legal pedantry of Islamic Maliki jurist, and the distributing amount of wealth of the ulama probably lay on the root of the revolt. He captured Murtola with the help of Ibn al-Qabila and 70 Murids in 1144. With the aid of Governor Evora ibn Wazir and Muhammad ibn al-Mundir ibn Qasi Silves, Evora, Beja, Hulava, Niblia, and organized two unsuccessful raids attacks against the Seville and Cordoba. The revolt of Meridian greatly weakened its ability for the Almoravids to respond to external threats, indirectly aiding the Christians. Meridian split in 1145, and Ibn Qasi was deposed by Ibn Wazir. He then joined the Almohads, who placed him in charge of the Silves. That same year, Alfonso Henriques led a raid into the Muslim territory and reached as far as Beja, from which he and his party returned loaded with spoils. In 1145, still, the Templars were granted Castle of Longorovera by Alfonso Henrique's sister Sancha and her husband Fernando Mendes de Braganca II. The conquest of Santarém, 1147. In order to spy the defenses of Santarém, Alfonso dispatched the Mem Ramirez to the city under the pretext of speaking with the Templars taken captive at Soure. The moment to attack Santarém had been well picked, as the Almoravid authority was disintegrating in Iberia and Africa due to revolts, especially because of the Almohads. On March 10th, the king departed from Coimbra with 250 men, among Templar knights and footmen, and by the end of 5 days, march done by night and secondary pass, they camped on Pernes. By dawn the following day, the walls of Santarém were scaled by a small group of men, commanded by Mem Ramirez, who then opened the gates to the king and his men waiting outside. Thus the city fell under Portuguese control. The definitive conquest of Lisbon, 1147. After the fall of Edessa, Pope Eugenius III called for a new crusade. Under these circumstances, a new ruler fleet totaling 164 ships anchored at Porto on June 16, 1147, on their way to the Middle East. Bishop of Porto, Pedro Pitoes II, convinced the people to participate in the project in the siege to Lisbon. The hosts of Alfonso Henriques departed the Coimbra on 6th of June, and when the Crusader fleet sailed up to Tagus on June 28th, the Portuguese had already pitched camp in Mount São Gens to the north. The king was accompanied by some of the most distinguishing figures among the nobility of the time, such as Fernando Mendes II and Braganza, the royal ensign Fernando Perez Sativo, along with the other major or minor nobles such as Martim Moniz, who would perish in the siege. The Portuguese probably numbered about 3,000 men, while the Crusaders totaled 10,000 to 13,000 persons. On June 26th or 29th, the king met with the main Crusader leaders in order to decide how the spoils would be divided. It was agreed that the Crusaders would keep whatever plunder they could carry, prisoners and their ransom, as well as future trading rights, while the king would keep the city and its houses, so he could reward them as a prize for participants of the siege who expressed a desire to settle in Lisbon. Muslims refused an offer to surrender peacefully. The English and Normans pitched their camp in the west of the city, while the Germans and Flemish chose the place where the monastery of São Vincent de Fora now stands. A harsh siege followed, in which the outer suburbs were violently taken and the trebuchets, trebuchets. Underground mines and a large movable siege tower were used. At the end of the 3 months and 20 days, the Muslim defenders were severely afflicted by the hunger and plague due to the lack of room to bury the dead and asked to surrender. The king solemnly entered the city on October 25th.
Thank you for listening to the History of Portugal podcast, a Eat to My Own Beat podcast. New episodes every Friday. Get more information on the History of Portugal podcast on Facebook, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check out www.eattomyownbeat.com for more information on our travels.